This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
Abraham Lincoln spoke briefly, perhaps for no more than 3 minutes, at a ceremony in 1863 on the battlefield near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. At that same ceremony, another speaker droned on for more than 2 hours. But for well over a century, Lincoln's 272-word address is remembered, recited, even enshrined, while no one remembers much of anything of Edward Everett's 13,607-word oration. Definitely, words count if you use them correctly, and that's the point being driven by Joel Schwartzberg, a leadership communications coach whose clients have ranged from American Express to Comedy Central. He joins us in this podcast interview. Joel, I guess the short summation of everything that you are doing is that words count. Why is that?
Well, in some cases, words count, and honestly, in some cases, they don't. And that's why it's all the more important that you know which words matter. And the biggest overriding principle is your point. Now, your point is made up of words, but the point itself is actually more important than the words because you could use a variety of words to make your point. So if there's one thing I want leaders to know, it's that leaders make points. But here's the problem. People confuse points for other things like topics, themes, categories, catchphrases. For example, podcasting, that word is not a point. It's a topic. You're not telling me what you're arguing about podcasting. So a lot of my work is about using mindsets and tactics and tools and words to make sure you're championing true points, not just fuzzy ideas.
Joel, you have consulted some of the top business leaders in the nation. Surely, by the time they get to the top of these huge companies, they know all of this, don't they?
Well, they know a lot of it. And I know what they know because I Google it, or you or I can, or anyone in the Biz News audience can certainly Google it. So what I try to find are those nuggets of insight that are not out there. And I found quite a few of them, enough to fill a book, in fact. For example, a lot of leaders believe that information alone inspires. That if they tell you, and you know this from seeing presentations, the history of the project, how many people are involved, what's the investment, how many facilities, what's it going to take? Those things are like building a Wikipedia page or a book report. They tell you the inventory of the idea, but they don't sell the idea because there's no relevance there. What is all of that leading up to? What is the point or proposition or suggestion that that leader is making? And in my books, in both of my books, one is called Get to the Point and the other is The Language of Leadership. And they both have this key exercise in there called the I believe that test. And that's a very simple test. Children even use it to determine if you have a point or not. May I explain it? Share it
Absolutely. Give us the test. We always like pop quizzes.
Yeah, it's very simple. Basically, take what you think is your point, usually a one-sentence conveyance that you would say to a boss or a direct reporter, to a colleague, or to a conference. Now put the words, I believe that, in front of it. And here's the test. If you now have a complete sentence, not a fragment or not a run-on, something that would have impressed your fourth grade language arts teacher as a complete sentence, then you're on your way to making a point. And then you can work on sharpening it and championing it. But if it is not a complete sentence, you need to reimagine it so that it is. So let's use this concept that we're familiar with called leadership. I believe that leadership, not a sentence. I believe that the importance of leadership, not a complete sentence. I believe that the fundamentals of leadership, not a complete sentence. I believe that one of the most important efforts of leadership is to listen closely to their teams. Now that is a complete sentence, and you can just tell by the nature of listening to it that you want to say, go on. You want to hear someone illustrate and prove and show why active listening is such an essential part of leadership. You're actually informing me of the of the point you're about to make. And in so doing, you're engaging me and inspiring me. And those are the two key communication objectives for all leaders.
It sounds like you have to tap into some sort of well of emotion to get it across, correct?
That helps. That will help massage and convey your point. I like to use the word passion. People look for personal passion. It kind of energizes and it fuels to a point. It also indicates that, hey, I have a personal commitment I'm putting out there to this point. So let's get into it. Tell me about your personal reaction to it. It just shows a level of commitment by the leader. And that's something we look for leaders to do, not just throw something out there and hope for the best or create discussion. We want leaders there in the job of risk-taking, put themselves out there to have a proposal, argue for it, then take feedback on it so that dialogue can help elevate it.
Now, we can talk about getting customers and keeping customers, but in this day and age of a very tight labor supply, why is this important?
Making a point is important because it is the only thing that will give you impact. And I believe that it is more important for a leader to make points than for anyone else in the company to, for subject matter experts or lower level managers, because people look for leaders as the captain of the ship. How are we going to get from point A to point B? What is the destination? And how are we going to get there? Now, it doesn't mean that the leader needs to have all the answers. It is a collaborative process, but the leader needs to be able to articulate how are we going to get to that highest value outcome. And something I say often that makes writers sort of fearful and uncomfortable is that we're all in sales. Every single one of us, whether that's on your business card or not, because an idea is just as valuable as a product. And you need to sell those ideas. You need to tell me why I should buy this pen, as opposed to just putting the pen out there and telling me the ink is blue.
How important is it in getting your point across with passion that you have some level of stage presence or skills?
So now we're getting into the tactics that help you elevate that point. This is the third level, what I call championing your point. And some of those skills will impact your audience more. You know, and I keep using that term because it's important. I don't say to make you a better public speaker. I don't even say to clarify your point, because at the end of the day, here's the goal, not for you to speak, but for them to receive. Because you can speak in a bathroom. You can throw words out anytime. What difference does it make unless your audience, your team, your employees are making use of that insight? So a couple of things I always say. One is volume. Volume is not just about audibility. Volume conveys leadership. It conveys confidence, competence, and authority. Volume alone. In fact, you may not even be confident or feel like you know what you're talking about. But just by raising your volume, which is something a 6-year-old can do, conveys that. And for over 15 years, when I've been training public speakers, and I ask someone to go louder than they're comfortable doing, I ask the rest of the people in the group, whether it's classmates or clients, what difference did that make by Jill or Sam raising their volume? And the words I get back, Doug, assertive, knowledge, insight, competence, confidence, authority, merely by that one simple trigger, raising your volume. So that's something I always encourage people to do. I also encourage articulation that helps with comprehension. And very important, embrace pauses. That has a number of benefits. If you're an or an ah, we call these helper words or crutches sometimes. You don't want to say nonsense, and and ah are nonsense. But you can't tell someone to just stop saying and ah. You need what I like to say is a nicorette, something to replace that. So you want to replace the and ah with pauses. The more you use pauses, the more you will be able to use pauses to break out of that and ah spell. But here's the number one reason people should use pauses, Doug. Understand that it takes your audience 2 to 3 times longer to process your point than you need to make it. And this is reasonable, right? Because you've known your point for some time. You practiced it, you knew it, you maybe got a college degree in it, you've thought about it. But to an audience, a team, employees, they're hearing it for the first time. They need to hear it, listen to it, think about it, process it, add relevance to it. Should I write this down? Should I tweet this? Is it important for me? Should I share this at our next meeting? so many things they're thinking about. Meanwhile, the speaker is 6 sentences down the road. So pauses allows for that very important digestion time for an audience if you really want them to both comprehend and make use of what you're saying.
I would imagine that many of the people that you deal with are fearful of putting in a pause.
Right, because sometimes we think, oh, that indicates that I don't know what I'm saying. Or, we're afraid of silence. It's weird. It makes us uncomfortable. Well, I want people to toss that notion out of their heads as speakers. We could talk about as listeners and in a meeting, but as speakers, nobody comes to a presentation from a leader and later says, you know what, Jill was a fantastic public speaker, but I think she paused too many times. The reason we don't hear people say that generally is because pauses, as opposed to ums and ahs, are moments of nothingness. It's like our sophomore year of high school. Nothing happened. That's why we don't remember it at all. Or maybe we don't remember it for other reasons. But the point being, use them to your advantage. Use them to allow yourself time to be precise. When I do exercises with my clients and I say, use pauses for precision, and they do, it allows their minds to run ahead of their mouths. Usually, sometimes our mouths are running ahead of our minds. Blah, blah, blah. I want to say this and that and that and this. But our minds are running behind saying, wait, I want to prioritize those things. I want to pick the perfect words. So pausing allows to do that critical task of putting our mind ahead of our mouth. So these are all the beauty and the good things pauses can do for us. And to your question, I don't think you get demerited, and I don't think there's a lot of harm by pausing, even though our minds may think there are.
Joel, let's take a moment to tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. So I've been training public speakers since roughly 2006, a very long time. And in fact, this idea of making strong points and the criticality of making strong points didn't come to me until about 3 or 4 years after I started. I was teaching classic public speaking skills until one day I would ask the speakers, well, just share with me your point. What point are you trying to make? And I was stunned that what I was getting back were not points, that there were topics and themes and categories and ideas and notions. So that's when I sort of transformed my training, or at least elevated the idea and thought very hard about what a point is. Now, after doing that, I came out with my book, Get to the Point, in 2017. And I have a day job. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic and Executive Communications for a major nonprofit in New York City, but it's a national organization. So in my day job, I get to see this work in action. And extracurricularly, when I work with clients, whether they're in PR or HR or CEOs, I get to put them into action. And the beautiful thing about my job, and what I love so much about it, is I'm learning something almost literally every week, both in practice and with my clients. And then I apply it to the learning. What I tell my clients is that you're getting the best version of this training that's ever been, because you have the benefit of everything the people behind you have learned. The only version of this training that's going to be better is the next one, because they'll have the benefit of what you contributed.
At this point, we need to have you tell folks, how can they get in touch with you? Perhaps there's a website.
Perhaps there is, Doug, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't leverage all the platforms and channels available to me. And I mentioned that as a recommendation for people trying to get their message out. My home base is www.joelschwartzberg.net. And I like to think of my work as mostly open code. That is, I want people to make use of it as an IT term, meaning I'm giving you the basics, everything you need to utilize this material. So on that website, I have my podcasts, I have articles I've written for Harvard Business Review and Fast Company and Toastmaster Magazine, and lots of free ideas, because ultimately, whether you're a leader or you're not, or just an emerging leader, I want you to be able to champion your ideas, not just throw them out there and hope for the best. And finally, I like people to follow me on Twitter, where I make a practice of sharing ideas and everything I come up with, and also having a discussion about them. And they can follow me at the Joel Truth on Twitter.
Now, back to today's topic at hand, as they say, after the commercial interruption there. And that is, how have things changed in getting points across in this now new world of we're all on Zoom?
Right. Well, there is a changing expectation of the communication skills people want from their leaders. In fact, there was a Brunswick Group report, and only in 2019, that found that 93% of workers that they surveyed reported that leadership that communicates directly and transparently, 93% say that's what keeps them on the job. The only things that were ahead of that were pay and the ability to move up the hierarchy. So that just shows you what the expectations are. Now, you bring up this important thing, Zoom, this tool, and whether you use Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype or whatever, there's always a new platform out there. But some basics of using it, make sure that your head and shoulders are in the frame. Basically, you want to do everything possible to make sure your point and yourself as the communicator are clear. So don't stand too far back. Don't stand too close so that part of your face is cut off. Make sure you're loud and understand the things we call Zoom fatigue. I know we like to add an ism to things to make them travel and to make ourselves famous and write books. But there is this thing called Zoom fatigue, which is true, which is how your mind is trying to reconcile being at home physically in your pajamas amongst your cats or your whatever room you're in, yet your mind being at work. That can create a number of distractions. Someone put it nicely with a metaphor. Imagine yourself having a meeting in an elevator. You wouldn't have a meeting there because you're too close to everybody. It's almost too intimate. Yet on Zoom, it seems like we're that close, face to face with everybody. So it's very distracting. And we have to readjust and recalibrate the way our mind works to make it make sense.
Do you find it's really tough to get that point across, get people, presenters able to do that?
Not if I give them clear tips to. Like if you say, be present, people might be like, all right, but what does that really mean? So let's break it down. Turn off your email, put your phones away. Don't multitask because, modern understanding is that multitasking is a fiction. You're not actually doing things simultaneously. You're merely toggling to two different things, and that's very taxing on your brain. If you've ever tried to answer email and pay attention to a Zoom meeting at the same time, you know that multitasking is a complete fiction, at least in terms of effectiveness. So, and there are a lot of distractions. And one of the things I always say is be aware that if you have something distracting in your background or in front of you, whether it's kids or animals, that is not just a distraction to you, it is also a distraction to your audience. I like to say that everything in your environment, everything that people can see, if it is not supporting your point, it is subtracting from your point.
Now, if we were to apply this to the current Zoom, you have a buddy over your right shoulder. Who is that guy?
So you can't see it here, but I have a cat in the background. That's one of my cats. I have two cats live in this Zoom room with me. One of them is Colin, and the other one is Sally. And I'm going to say that they add to my points because they indicate a level of compassion. I do a lot of work in animal welfare, particularly, and clients work in animal welfare. So that adds to that. And yes, I'm sharing this room with someone else. It is adding to authenticity. It's realism. They live here, I live here. So as long as they're not doing something very distracting, like using the box, then it's all good with me. But if you want to put across an idea that you are well-read, that you're knowledgeable, then books are good for your background. If you want to show that you have a specialty in comic books, then comic books are a good background. I do caution against virtual backgrounds. People think often, well, this is a good way to show something neutral or to show something I'm interested in. But this is what I say about that. This communication over Zoom, just like it would be in a real meeting, is supposed to be real. It's supposed to be authentic. It's supposed to be real people in a real place talking to each other. So just consider that if you're injecting something artificial into that dynamic, it is not in line with the purpose of that communication or the goal of that communication, which is supposed to be real. It's supposed to be real environment, not a canned environment.
I'm sorry, I was watching the cat.
Right. So speaking of distractions, yeah, I'm going to double think that. Usually they're not there. But you raised a really good point about distractions. Something is moving in the background. It's just something else for you to look at besides paying attention to me. So I'm going to take that as a recommendation.
At least they don't bark.
Now you're getting to the beauty of cats.
Yeah, so the dog Fridays at the office, which I guess were common back in the 80s and still are in some of our companies. What would you like to add, Joel, that we haven't had a chance to talk about? And it could be anything.
Sure. I like to work in nuts and bolts tactics. So one of the things I always like to say to leaders and really anyone making a point, and let's be clear here, when I say leaders, I don't mean necessarily CEOs. Anyone running a meeting is a leader. Anyone taking ownership of a project and attaching themselves to the outcome, that's a leadership quality. So what I say to leaders in that context are, here are 3 words that really help, 3 phrases. I recommend, I propose, I suggest. Those 3 phrases are leadership tools because, like I said earlier, you're putting yourself out there, you're putting yourself and your reputation on the line to make a recommendation. If you have direct reports and they're bringing you status reports, book reports, here's what's going on, information, which we already said wasn't the most inspiring or useful type of communication, a leader should say, all right, thank you for that. What do you recommend we do next? What do you suggest? And the more you do that, this amazing thing happens. Those direct reports come back later and say, all right, here's the status reports, or here's the data, and here's what I recommend. Boom. Now that person has elevated themselves and adopted a leadership approach, which will only do wonders for them in terms of their promotion and their wanting to be seen as a leader. But the bottom line, if there's one thing I want your audience to take away, it's this idea that leaders make points and should make points every way possible, as often as possible, at the beginning and at the end. Because if there's one thing you want your audience to take away, you should always know the answer to that question. It's the point. What is the impact of what I'm suggesting? And how can you play a part in it?
You've been watching the Biz News Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@biznews.com. Thanks for watching.